Okay, so we just finished code that drew a series of rectangles with filled ovals down the diagonal. I want to do a couple of things here. I want to do the same thing but go up the diagonal. And you might ask, well, why not just go back down, which we could. But I want to go up the other diagonal, and I also want to slow it down a little bit so we can see where each one gets drawn when it runs. Okay, so we'll come back to our picture for a second on paper. And I just want to notice sort of where this, again, I think I can just use the similar code as we had before, except instead of starting here at 0, 0, we need to start down here at, well, let's see, the x would be 0, because we haven't moved left or right, and the y value would be 400 minus 20, so it would be 380. And now the x value is going to still increase. And the change in x is still going to increase by 30 each time, because we're moving from left to right. But the change in y is actually going to decrease by 20 to go up the diagonal. And then again, there's 20 copies. So we'll go back over to Eclipse. I'm going to make a new class, actually, Daigonals 2. And I think I'm going to just kind of copy everything from Diagonals 1. So first I'm going to copy the comment block and the import statement. This program will use loops and methods to draw a series of rectangles down. I'm going to move the word down. Down one diagonal. And up the other. Oh, I see, I have a typo here, rectangles. And actually, if we go back to Diagonals 1, I don't know if you want to do this or not, but rectangles, typo, fix that. This program will, I didn't use any methods there, so it's just using loops in Diagonals 1. It's Diagonals 2 that will use methods. Let me put a period in there. Okay, and then I want to copy main, so we'll copy everything inside of main, I guess. And paste it into Diagonals 2 inside of main. Okay, and then we'll run it, make sure it worked. And then I talked about trying to slow this down. So that's the first thing I want to do is after it draws a rectangle, I want to use the panel p.sleep. And it's going to slow it down by however many milliseconds I want between each rectangle and oval combination. Let's go 20 milliseconds between each. That's not going to be very slow, but we should be able to at least see them. Oh, that went pretty fast. So maybe we slow that down by 100 milliseconds, or a tenth of a second between each one. Okay, so that's kind of leaning towards how we're going to do some animation, is put some sleeps in there. Maybe instead of, so one thing I could do here, if I wanted this to look like it was just moving down the page, I could put it to sleep and then clear the panel after each time. And now instead of drawing a series of rectangles down the diagonal, it's going to have one rectangle that moves down the diagonal. It went pretty fast. You could slow it down by just changing how long it's going to sleep. And also, the movement is a little bit jerky because it jumps the entire one whole space before printing the next one. So usually in animation, we would not have it move so fast, so many spaces at once. Okay, so that's an idea of what we're coming to later. I'll I'll take that clear out. I'll just comment it out. Maybe I'll put a comment in here. Use this to have the object move down the diagonal. Maybe I'll put move in parentheses. And then I'm not crazy about how wide that comment is, so what I'm going to do is put that comment above the clear statement. And then comment out the clear. Okay, so that is code that moves our guy. Now we don't move it, we just print it down the diagonal. And the 200 sort of allows us to see it happening a little clearer. Okay, good. Close these windows, and now I want to draw another set of rectangles and ovals going up the diagonal. And I really just want to copy the same code, all of it, that whole loop, just so you can see how similar this code is and why you might want to use a method. Because if my code is almost identical, these sets of code are almost identical. So that's going to tell us that we want to capture that those processes in a method. I'm going to get rid of this comment here. This was only needed for the one. Okay, so maybe I'll do a third diagonals after this with the method, just so we can see how both work. So the second one, the starting value for x and y is 0 and 380. So when I come in here, there's really a +0 here, the 30i plus 0, and 20i plus 0 for the x and y. So the x is staying the same, but the y is increasing by 380 in both cases. But now instead of increasing by 20 each time, we need to decrease by 20. So that means that the change in y value here is a -20 and a -20. But the same number of combinations are being drawn, and we're still doing the green and the black. So those two modifications to the start value and the slope for the y should allow us to draw the diagonal, the image down the diagonal, and then draw it back up the other diagonal. Cool. Okay, and so notice in the code, it's extremely repetitive. I mean, there's only, so what's changed going from one set of code to the other set of code? Well, let's see what's different. The 20 changed to -20, so that's the change in y, or delta y. The value from the y-intercept here, the b of y was 0, and now it's 380, and then everything else is the same. So let's make a Diagonals 3 class. And if you haven't gotten this one to work yet, just pause. We'll do Diagonals 3. And I'm actually going to go back and modify my comment in Diagonals 2, because I didn't actually, well, no, it's not modified yet. Let's copy all of this above here. So from the import statement up, paste it in. I want to go back to Diagonals 2. Again, I didn't use any methods, so I'm just going to get rid of the end methods part in my comment. I was working towards that, but I decided to do it in three different components. Okay, and then we're going to jump into main, and we're going to take, let's take again the first chunk of stuff in main from the sleep up. Copy, go into Diagonals 3 and paste it. I'm not a big fan of copy and paste in general. It's often good just to retype code because it helps you get a better feel for the syntax. But in this case, because we're literally doing the same thing, I just want to get that in there. Okay, so what I'd like to do, and maybe I shouldn't have copied this in here yet, but what I'd like to do instead of this is call a method. and figure out, well, what would the method be called? Well, it'd be called sort of draw the diagonal, maybe. Draw diagonal. And then what would the parameters be needed for that method? Well, we would need to send this graphics object G because it is being used in this loop. So this loop is all going to go back. This whole loop is going to go into the method. So any variable used in this loop that's not defined in the loop needs to be passed in as a parameter. So you'll notice both G and P are used in this group. Both the graphics object and the panel are both being used. So I would need to pass both G and P in as parameters. And then we didn't change the X, we didn't change an X value between our two loops back in Diagonals 2. We didn't change the slope, we didn't change the start value. So the X values don't need to change. The Y values need to change, both the slope. So we need to pass in sort of the, let's call it, I could call it slope Y, change in Y, delta Y. Do I have a nice little delta Y? Let's call it dy for the change in Y. D meaning delta. Dy is the change in Y. And then we need the y-intercept of the Y. So let's call that the B. Let's call it by. Maybe I should capital Y like that. There we go. Let's use the Y as capitalized. So dy for delta Y and by for the y-intercept of Y. And I think that was all that was changing in the loop. So let's go back to Diagonals 2 for a second and just look again. So I need to pass the graphics object and the panel in because I'm using them within the loop. And then what's changing between the two loops? The 20 becomes a negative 20. And the 0 here becomes 380. All right, so go back to Diagonals 3. So there's our function call. And then we want to define that function header. So go below main. I notice my indentation is off there somehow. So that means I must be missing, yep. I'm missing a closing thing when I did my copy. Eclipse should be seeing the right indentation for you. So whenever that's off, you can kind of figure out that you might be missing or you might have an extra brace, and that happens often when you copy and paste because I miss them or you miss them, someone misses them. So that error is coming because we haven't defined the method header here. So public static is not returning anything, so void draw diagonal. You know, and you'll notice this takes some thought. It takes some work on the front end. We're sending in a graphics object. Let's call it capital G. Let's just call it little g, it doesn't matter. And we're sending a drawing panel key. And then we have the change in Y, which is an integer. Let's call it dy, same thing. Let's use lowercase dy. Dy, we'll use the same letters. And we're sending in an integer by. And the reason I switched to a capital Y, it wouldn't matter on the dy so much, but I didn't want by to look like the word by. Okay, and then so now we should have established that our method call was working, and it should be working, but I notice there's still errors here. So I go back up here. So this is maybe where it's a little confusing. Let's just call this dy, and let's just call this lowercase y, and let's just call this b. So that's not going to fix the error, but it's going to make it a little clearer where the error might be coming from. And again, I'm not crazy about using the same letters. So let's just use graph and panel. I don't want to use the same variables because I see right here there's an error, and I want to make sure that we can understand what that error is. So that error says, multiple markers at this line, dy cannot be resolved to a variable. We never defined this dy in main. So I need to define dy. Well, dy is an integer, and we'll set it off equaling 0. But I'm not sure what it needs to equal yet. So let's just declare it as an integer first. And then same thing with by, integer by, we declare them both. Oh, we can't send them until they're assigned. So even though we've declared them, we still have to give them a value. So now let's look back and check. So initially, the slope on y is positive 20, and the slope on the y-intercept for the y values is 0. So if we go back to our original code, this first one is 20 with nothing being added to the 20 times I. So initially, Daigonals 3, we're going to use dy, the change in y is initially positive 20, and the initial y start value is 0. And I kind of like the word y start better. So I'm going to refactor this and rename it. Notice, don't be afraid to rename stuff. You could see when I first named this, I didn't like it. That is a lot more descriptive, y start, than by. And then down here in the function, this is fine as b. So here it's fine, dy, little dy. What I might do here, go back here, I might fix this again. So I've been having this issue with naming. This is not uncommon. I have a lot of experience with this, and I still struggle with it. So people still always struggle with this. I'm going to change that to lowercase dy, and I'm going to change this one to the word slope. So now it wouldn't matter whose slope it is. I know it's the slope for y. I know this is the slope for b. So maybe we come up here and we tell the reader slope and b refer to the changing refer to changes made in the y direction. So notice how that comment, and I could say here if I wanted to be a little more precise, I could say parameters. They know to look. Parameters slope and b refer to changes made in the y direction of the object. So now it's more clear what they represent, and I don't have to have all these weird dy, db, db, these weird names floating around. I have a dy for the change in y and a y start value. Okay, so now I'm going to copy all this code out of main, the for loop, cut it out, and put it inside of draw diagonal. Now we gotta modify it a little bit. In that I didn't use the word G, I used the name graph. So this is not g.setFill, it's graph.setColor, graph.fill oval, graph.setColor. I could have used the rename, you can see here that graph, and then I didn't use P, I used the word panel. Okay, and then a couple other things should change. The X values are not changing, but the Y values are changing. So this is no longer 20 all the time. This is now slope. And to that slope I, we need to add B. And that Y value is the same, copy it, as down here, the Y value for the rectangle. So slope times I plus B. We look back at our original thing here, y equals mi plus b. Slope times I plus b is what we're using. And we're going to let the m and the b change as parameters, slope and b, for the y direction of the objects. Okay, so this should should draw the down diagonal. So let's run it and see if it does. There it is, the down diagonal. So it seemed like a lot of work to get that to draw the down diagonal. But if you look at main now, we added 2 lines of code, the declarations on the dy and the y start, and then I called draw diagonal, and I'm going to change them. So I'm going to let dy now equal, for the second one, the dy is a -20. And the y start is 380. And then we're going to call draw diagonal again, sending G and P and dy and y start. We'll run it again. There's our down diagonals, and it should be followed by our up diagonals. Nice. And then I'll make one more comment. You know, we've done here, we've used our methods, and notice, you know, it actually doesn't feel like we've saved that much space. I could simplify things a little bit. I don't really need in main a dy and a y start, because instead of sending dy here, I could just send 20 and 0. And instead of dy here, I could send -20 and 380. And then I can take out these declarations of dy and y start. Now, why that might be a little confusing is the person who's now reading this code has no idea what the 20 and the 0 represent. So it's much less code, but then we need to make sure in here or in here that we comment what the 20 and the 0 represent. So, I mean, I wanted to undo. Let's see, can I not undo? You know, since we've already written it, I might just leave it there. It makes the code much clearer. Does it add a couple lines of code? Yes. If you take those lines of code out, you know, we could do this again. And I could add in some comments here that say something like, sending graphics, sending G, graphics, and drawing panel, G and P, along with dy and the y start value for the objects to be drawn. And you might say on the diagonal. So, I mean, because here there's only 2, this to me makes a little more sense. Just have the numbers in. But what we could imagine is that we have an x slope, a y slope, an x start, and a y start. And we could change all 4 of those. And if that were the case, I think it's better to sort of have the variables in main and change them and pass them out. I'm not sure, but let's run it, make sure it works. There we go down. There we go up. Done. And I will leave you with the code. There it is.